Okay, good evening. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name is Leah Shedrow, and I am an events manager here at Young Professionals in Foreign Policy, also known as YPFP. If you aren't familiar with us, we are an organization dedicated to building the foreign policy leaders of tomorrow, and we do so by providing capacity building programs, event programming, a global community of peers, as well as opportunities for writing and publication experience. So tonight we are very excited to host our Pride Happy Hour. Thank you so much to our partners on this event, to George Washington University, George Eliot School of International Affairs. Within the Eliot School, we have Out in IA, which some of our panelists are from tonight, as well as Out in National Security. And we are going to be discussing with our great panelists different pressing issues within international relations with LGBTQIA+ professionals and allies. And we have our moderator tonight, Jack Reeves. So Jack is going to lead us in a discussion, and then we will go into breakout rooms. So Jack, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Leah, and good evening, everyone. Like Leah said, I'm Jack Reeves. I'm an undergrad at the George Washington University's Eliot School of International Affairs. I'm calling you from my hometown of Kansas City. And just really quickly, you may or may not recognize behind me Liberty Memorial, which is the original National World War I memorial. And its companion museum back there. But what's interesting is that the new dedicated World War I memorial in DC is in Pershing Park, and there's a Pershing Road that goes right by this memorial. So that's kind of interesting. Of course, they're both named after John Pershing, who was the six-star general. But regardless of that, I'm delighted to be with you with the Eliot School's new LGBTQ affinity group Out in International Affairs, Young Professionals in Foreign Policy, our event co-sponsor Out in National Security, and it's an especially special treat to be in conversation with just some sharp scholars and practitioners from across international affairs, national security domains, with wide range of expertise and experience. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Hopefully we'll be able to reflect on the panelists' individual experiences navigating different stages of their career as LGBTQ individuals, and then explore the importance of diversity and uplifting LGBTQ voices in foreign policy decision-making. And then if we have time, hopefully try to maybe tease out where we might go from here in terms of advancing and protecting LGBTQI+ rights abroad. So I'd love to start by having our panelists introduce themselves. Who are you? What do you do? Where are you calling from? Why are you here? So I guess we could start with Alice.
Thank you so much, Jack. My name is Alice Schyllander. My pronouns are both she, her, and they, them. And I'm a recent graduate of the Master of Arts in International Affairs program at the Eliot School of International Affairs. And I'm excited to represent the newly formed Eliot School Out in International Affairs initiative tonight as well. And I'm currently doing consulting work for Micro Rainbow International, working on a guide to advance economic empowerment for LGBTQ folks through multilateral development banks. And I previously worked for Vital Voices, the Tahrir Justice Center, Planned Parenthood, and the Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice. And I'm calling from Toledo, Ohio tonight, and I'm really excited to join you all.
Great. How about Professor Sotomayor?
Hello, everyone. Happy Pride Month, and it's wonderful to be here and meet so many of you. As was mentioned, I'm a professor at the Elliott School. I'm an associate professor of international affairs, and I'm also the program director of the MA program in security policy studies. I do research on mostly Latin American security, and I'm here primarily to express my support to all of you. I'm one of the oldest ones, I guess. So I came out in the 1990s, in 1998, when I was living in New York. I was born and raised in Mexico, and I never came out to my father, actually. So I didn't come out at all until I came to the United States as a graduate student. And I wish I had a support team and group like you guys have to provide encouragement and support. But it's never too late. And so I'm here to support you and know that, you know, at least from the academic side point of view, we see you, we listen to you, and we're eager to interact with you as well.
Thank you, Professor. How about Denver?
Thanks, Jack, and thanks everyone for joining the session this evening. I'm Denver Barrows. I spent about 7 years in the Air Force in full-time active duty and full-time reserve roles before transitioning to the Air Force Reserves sometime last year and transitioning into the private sector. In the Air Force, I spent time doing air transportation logistics internationally, specifically in Germany and Syria, Puerto Rico, and then pressed on to fly for a bit. I fly the KC-10 in Air Force Reserves, and then work at Amazon Air, the air cargo business of Amazon in the private sector. I think this is a really unique opportunity for all of us to gather here today, and excited by the chance to do it on Zoom and hopefully one day in person here shortly. So thanks for having me. Calling in from New York City, although home is San Francisco.
Awesome. How about Hanna?
Good evening, everybody. My name's Hanna Tripp, she and hers, and I'm currently a senior policy advisor for a nonprofit called Minority Veterans of America. I previously worked, was in the Air Force as a AC-130 aerial gunner and a C-5 loadmaster, and have kind of held multiple different roles with both Congressman Joe Kennedy and Congressman Seth Moulton. And I'm calling from the lovely city of Salem, Massachusetts. We killed witches once, and now we have a good tourist industry. But I'm looking forward to spending a lovely evening with all you guys. I think Arturo, I'm not even going to try to top what he said. I mean, I think it's amazing that there is a supporting community, and I think above all, that's the best part of this evening. So I look forward to spending it with you.
And yeah, great, thank you. And then finally, Teresa. Teresa, I saw you unmute, so I was hesitant because I thought you were going to go, but Teresa.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Hey, y'all. I'm Teresa Kennedy. Prior Navy, worked a while too at the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce and Economic Equality nonprofit advocacy organization. And I'm currently working for the government again, this time as a Navy civilian over in acquisitions at Naval Sea Systems Command. So this has already been touched upon, but I just think the community aspect of this is awesome for all of us to gather during Pride. Happy Pride, y'all. And I'm repping out in national security tonight, which is a great organization. And so happy to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. So, and I'm pretty sure that's everyone. So again, like people said, happy Pride Month. You know, I guess I'd love for our panelists, and some of the people kind of touched on this in their intro, but I'd love for people to have the opportunity, if they're willing, to reflect on what your experience has been like as a member of the LGBTQ community in your profession. And I know some of the panelists are truly young professionals, others are more mid-career, so there's a range, which is great. But what have you found to be maybe some of the challenges or areas of progress, or maybe even points of pride that you've encountered? And anyone can take a stab at this question.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in first. Won't be shy here. So I went straight out of college to being what we joked amongst ourselves as being a professional gay at an LGBT advocacy organization, and then went right into the heart of hard power in Navy acquisitions. And kind of had this experience of re-entering the closet, so to speak, just because I was in a new career field. I was very junior, right? The federal government side of the military, I feel like is still pretty senior. Not a lot of millennials and not a lot of Gen Z. Um, and had this experience about 1 to 2 years of just kind of hiding myself, right? Others being able to talk about their families and what they did with them on the weekend, and me not even being able to mention that I live with my girlfriend, right? And so I found that it was really once I had established that confidence in my professional competency and also saw that others accepted me for that, which is also hard as a woman in the NatSec space, right? That I was confident enough to be able to share that part of me. And then, of course, immediately felt relief and all of the things that come with that of being able to bring my true self to the workspace. But I think this pressure of even in 2021 of still needing to establish your competency and your value to the organization before you can truly be yourself, I think that pressure is still really prevalent, especially when you get into NatSec and anywhere in the federal government. And I can only speak to NatSec, right, not IA. So looking forward to hear what my other panelists say. But that was just my experience.
No, and I'll echo that kind of last part. It really, national security and policy and pretty much most jobs on the Hill, it's a very small world, and there is a ton of pressure when you come from any kind of minority background that you're kind of a de facto figurehead or symbol of that background, and your actions speak not only to yourself and your competency, but also to almost the community you come from. And that can be debilitating at times because it makes you start to second guess yourself, makes you start to overthink things, and it really can be kind of unproductive and almost kind of create a self-fulfilling prophecy where you start playing it so safe that you're almost becoming the stereotype you're trying to avoid. And that's a very real pressure even in 2021 that I've kind of been experiencing. I kind of came into this world a little bit differently than most. I got into the policy side of things basically because I've faced this really bad discrimination issue at the Veterans Affairs, and they pretty much just told me to go screw. So I kind of went up and down, back and forth with them for a while, and I ended up reaching out to my local congressman, Joe Kennedy, and through that experience, he somehow offered me a chance to get on his team as a Mission Continues fellow, and I've kind of been doing that ever since. But it's tough to navigate the different identities that are associated with being in this world, and I think it's important for you to be able to represent the community, but it's also equally important for you to represent yourself. And it's definitely a tightrope to make sure you're not just being pigeonholed or kind of put into just this one category of issues just because that's your background, even though it might not be your interest or even your passion. But I think that's something not to dissuade anybody, but I think it's important to be cognizant of because it definitely hit me by surprise.
I think Hanna reminded me a little bit of my own story in talking about being mindful of yourself in this workspace, and largely because I started ROTC when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was was in effect. And so I participated in ROTC on a different university campus than where I attended school, and drew this very defining line between where I could enjoy my social life and my friends, and then where I went and pursued ROTC. When I put on the uniform, that meant something completely and totally different than who I was outside of uniform. And I think when I was a junior, that's junior in college, that's when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, and where there was an opportunity then to potentially blend the two. And I absolutely did not. I still kept that very fine line. And in the early part of my military career, kept that line very, very well drawn. And over time, once I became more comfortable with myself and comfortable with the people with whom I was working, was able to more quickly blend the two. And I think it's just important to be mindful of where folks are coming from in those experiences. There are still many people who served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell who are serving in the military, and others who joined far after. And so the pace at which you're going to be able to blend parts of your life may be much faster than others, and some may be slower than others, but it's important to just be mindful of how well you're doing in those situations, I think, first and foremost.
So I'm happy to jump in. I would say that over my lifetime, I've been able to see American public opinion shift dramatically on LGBTQ identities and acceptance. And I'm a beneficiary of that public opinion shifting and the work of generations of activists in making that happen. But I would say that a challenge that still exists is that still overcoming, and many queer and trans folks are still overcoming, people using arguments in the international affairs space in particular, but using arguments of cultural relativism to dismiss even the existence of queer and trans folks in settings, and their heightened vulnerability in settings of post-conflict and in disaster settings, and for example. And I think that's why it's so important to be out and to be vocal and to be an advocate for queer and trans folks, particularly in policymaking spaces. And yeah, that's, I'm so excited to be in a room full of people who are doing that every day, who are highlighting the experiences of queer and trans folks globally and ensuring that we're not erased, we're here.
Absolutely. Any other contributions to this question?
I'd like to, on the one hand, celebrate the achievements that we have accomplished. Of course, there's a lot of work to be done, but I'm just amazed by how rapid things have been evolving. I worked at the Naval Postgraduate School as a civilian instructor when there was also Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It didn't only affect the soldiers. I was told as an instructor not to come out because I would put, as I was told, I would make the officer corps nervous. And since then, of course, we've seen what has happened, has been lifted. I came to America when gay marriages were not allowed. It wasn't a path towards citizenship. And also, if you had HIV, that was a denial for citizenship as well. And so all those things have slowly changed. I also came to America at a time when studying queer issues from a security perspective was like almost non-existent. It was queer studies and queer literature, but there was no way of studying national security perspectives on queer issues, for instance. And now I see really a proliferation of studies and just overall knowledge on our area. And finally, we've also have had some interesting rulings from the Supreme Court of Justice regarding discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender. And so these are things that have happened in my lifespan. So I'm hopeful for your generation, but I'm reminded of the fact that there's a lot to be done. The transgender community has been very hit. And of course, there are other countries outside of the United States where still LGBTQ members are being discriminated, in some cases tortured, they're put in prison. And so, we haven't been able to reach globally to other parts of the world, especially the developing world. And so I hope that, your generation, you can spread these norms and hopefully allow other countries to make that fundamental cultural shift that we've been slowly experiencing at home. So I celebrate, and at the same time, I have hope in your generation.
I think that's so important, Professor, what you say about not only the shift, but the I guess the lens of like the LGBTQ lens, queer lens on national security and international security issues. I think that like really broadens people's perspective as you talk about, which is interesting and very cool. So another question I'm wondering is, what do you all see as the benefits of an inclusive and diverse foreign policy national security workforce, and how do the inclusion and empowerment of diverse identities, LGBTQ plus and otherwise, strengthen our foreign policy and national security decision making and implementation? And then an extension of that, what are some concrete steps that we can take, or steps that we think will work in order to get there to that level of inclusivity and diversity and equity that we know is important?
So I'm happy to start off. I think really Don't Ask, Don't Tell kind of epitomizes the importance of inclusion. And it's the LGBTQ plus community wasn't the first minority group to be discriminated against in the United States military. And you kind of see the importance of diversity and inclusion in the very foundation of our military. I mean, it was a gay Prussian that pretty much uniformly established our military professionalism at Valley Forge. And from there, we have had segregated units. We have had, individuals who have served this country while their families are in, camps in the Midwest for no other reason than that they're Japanese. And you have seen these groups kind of overcome these prejudices and really demonstrated that they are really have things of value and are able to really contribute to our nation and to our security overall. So the importance of inclusion and diversity is not arbitrarily removing this pool of talent that could really benefit and serve our nation. And you see that with Don't Ask, Don't Tell. You see so many fantastic military members, soldiers, airmen, Marines, that have just gone above and beyond in their service for this country, but then just be arbitrarily kicked out for this one aspect of who they are. And usually in the most benign reasons possible. It's usually not as this kind of like possible, like potential misnomer goes that, somebody didn't want to serve, so they just come out as gay. It's usually somebody either finds out that they're dating somebody, or they member lets it slip, or one of the most insidious ways and one of the more common ways was they would tell a military therapist or mental health counselor of their sexual identity or gender identity, and they would be reported by that counselor. So it's kind of leads me to the next point where it's important to recognize where we're coming from. And one of the things I thought was amazing about the latest hearing that the House Foreign Affairs Committee had was this recognition of how we as a country have exported this kind of vitriol and hate to other portions of the world. And, this has been through, cultural programs or cultural institutions that are not affiliated with the government, but also through our own government policy. I'm sticking with what I know, so I'm sticking with DoD military focus, but I developed really close relationships with, I guess, my counterparts in Canada. And one of the things I've really learned and that they've Canadians, side note, are just they're literally a stereotype in the best possible way. Like they're the friendliest, nicest, most patient people, and I don't like stereotypes, but yeah, that's very much a truism. But they had their own equivalent of Don't Ask, Don't Tell that they struggled with, and that whole program was created by our government regulations for how we dictated people could join the Five Eyes intelligence program, which is an intelligence sharing program that was created after World War II, I think, to kind of streamline information between the various Commonwealth countries in the United States. And one of the requirements that stipulated a country's ability to join was to ensure that they proactively sought to expel LGBTQ plus members. And that was a birth for at least Canada, for their own kind of pogroms and their own kind of discriminatory policies that lasted well into the 90s. So yeah, I think we have this kind of perception of assumed excellence within the foreign community, that we lead by example, and that we always know best, and that we've always done the best, and that's not always true. And I don't think it's great to start off on a negative, but I think it's important for us to build a mutual understanding and to build a mutual appreciation with foreign partners, to kind of recognize the realities of this relationship, the good or the bad.
Yeah, for sure, Hannah, and thank you for that. I think that arc and the progress and the overcoming, the arc that's still making the shape is important to note. But on that point that you noted about a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing, there's another House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing on June 24th coming up that is on advancing and protecting LGBTQ rights abroad. So I'm just wondering, what are some things that you think that anyone thinks should be prioritized at a hearing like that, that should be of focus to members of the foreign policy, national security community of any identity, but especially as LGBTQ people? What is important to you in terms of advancing that mission?
So I'm happy to jump in here. So in my master's thesis research, I examined the experiences of Central American asylum seekers coming to the United States and LGBTQ asylum seekers. And I really think that it's important that as the Biden-Harris administration is really performing our global image as a defender of refugee rights and asylum seeker rights, it's really important that we take a look at how our current asylum policies and immigration policies disproportionately harm LGBTQ asylum seekers. I really think that needs to be a priority. And in particular, I think we need to question in this space how LGBTQ asylum seekers are being disproportionately harmed by Title 42, which is a public health law that's being employed to deny all asylum seekers who are coming to the US-Mexico border at the moment. And we've seen under that law that it's disproportionately harmed queer and trans asylum seekers, and that over 80% of asylum seekers have reported, according to Human Rights First, have reported experiencing harm since the Biden administration has come in, and violence since the Biden administration has come in due to this policy, due to being turned away. So I think it's really important that at this moment we really examine our immigration laws and examine our refugee laws to ensure that people who are being persecuted for their gender and for their sexuality aren't being returned back into situations of violence and persecution and poverty.
Yeah, Jig, I'll back up and address your previous question, because I don't Alice, you're so well educated on this. It sounds like what you said was amazing. And Hanna did a really good job of laying out the moral case, right, for why LGBT inclusion in the national security space is important, which is an awesome case. But also wanted to bring in that there's also a really good business case for it, right? So Dr. Hicks, the first female DepSecDef, was on the Hill earlier this week and faced some criticism from the Republican senators who have been sort of deriding this new wokeness in the military and national security, right? And she pointed out that, look, we're already essentially in a war with China and Russia and some of these other rising powers for workforce talent, right? We need to make sure our smartest minds, our most dedicated minds are tackling these really complex challenges. And I tend to believe that within the United States, Silicon Valley and the federal government are also in really fierce competition to make sure the tech-oriented, AI-oriented, cyber-oriented, talented individuals that are coming up in the workforce, also should, in my opinion, serve the government and the really complex challenges that we're facing in those sectors as well. And so for the federal government and for the Pentagon especially to just completely shut out a sector of the American population purely based upon an identity, right, that they have no control over is shockingly poor business practices, right? And so just from that perspective, America is struggling to maintain humanitarian ideals around the nation, and we need our best people. And so we can't just be excluding folks just because there are, remaining bigots out there who want to do just that.
Yeah, I can't echo what Teresa said enough. We are in a great power competition where just sheer numbers of people are needed in order to be effective and hopefully employ some type of competitive advantage. But we're also making up for lost time in many ways because of the historic policies that Hanna talked about. So when you think about how many years institutions like ROTC were removed from college and university campuses because of policies that existed within the DoD, you've created this generational perception that the DoD and serving in national security is a place only for a certain type of person. And so there are huge strides to be made in terms of making up for 25 years plus a policy that kept people from coming to work for the federal government, who we absolutely need to work for the federal government because they are the innovative cutting edge minds. And if we don't take that practice and put it to work with how we're going to recruit folks in this next generation, we are grossly unprepared for the battles that we're going to have to engage in.
And I couldn't agree more with all of you. So you put it so eloquently as well. And I think that, to me, I actually don't like the expression LGBTQ rights, because to me it's about human rights. And I wish it could be elevated to that point, that it's just human rights. But to me, it's also about civil military relations and about who gets to serve in the armed forces and who doesn't. And that actually is what defines citizenship as well. My concern is that, we can have another presidential election and have another president who can reimpose all sorts of bans based on sexual orientation and gender, because we don't have a body of legislation protecting it. And so we really have to make the ruling by the Supreme Court of last year of essentially making discrimination based on sex and gender, we really have to bring it into the defense and to the national security space, so that in fact other presidents, no matter from what ideological perspective they come from, that they won't impose the type of restrictions that they did during the past administration. And so that decisions can really trickle down in a way that we do have an inclusive military where the armed forces are voluntary and in which we're not denying citizenship rights.
Yeah, well, thank you all for your important comments. Those are all really significant ideas to pursue. Leah, do you think now is an appropriate time to move on to our next? Okay, great. Yeah, so I think with all of this in mind, it might be time. Thank you, panelists, so much for your responses. I think we're going to transition into our breakout rooms now. So we're going to have some smaller groups within the Zoom for people to continue this discussion if they would like, and meet people and mix and mingle a little bit. So we're gonna, Leah and Jeff are going to move people into these Zoom breakout rooms. And then when we get into there, in each room, we can all introduce ourselves and what we do, and then a fun fact about yourself, in addition to where you're calling from, because that's always fun to hear as well. So panelists, thank you so much for your insightful comments on LGBTQ identities and foreign policy and national security. I really enjoyed the discussion, and I look forward to speaking with you further in breakout rooms. We're going to have 2 or 3 iterations of these rooms. There's going to be 10-ish minutes, and then we're going to switch into a new mixture of people. So you're welcome to stay for all the iterations if you would like, and meet the people. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Leah and Jeff. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, so our countdown is very close. We will be going into our second breakout room very shortly, and then we will have one more, and then we'll do our closing remarks. So have fun, everybody. Okay, we will have our last breakout room, and then we will say our closing remarks, and we will see everyone soon. So here we go. Okay, if that's everyone, thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. And thank you to all of our wonderful panelists for sharing all of your experiences. And of course, our wonderful moderator, Jack, thank you for being up for the job to do this. Also like to thank all of our partnering organizations, the Elliott School out in IA, as well as out in National Security. If you are a YPFP member, please be on the lookout for our upcoming emails with upcoming events as well as newsletters. And if you are not a member, please check out our website so you can become a member. And Jack, go ahead. Do you have something to say?
Yeah, just really quickly, tomorrow out in National Security, our, I guess, co-sponsoring organization is having their event on Zoom with another organization, New America, to celebrate the 2021 LGBTQIA plus leadership list and new voices list. And some people in this room actually are on those lists, which is very exciting. So feel free to, I encourage everyone to tune in to that event if you're able to. And you can find it at just the Out National Security website.
Oh. You're muted. Okay.
I was done.
You're good. Okay, cool. All right. Well, thank you so much again, everybody. Yeah, feel free to add each other on LinkedIn if you would like. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much.